In this video, we'll be going over the best cards which include an effect to have the stats of a monster on the field somehow. Starting this off at number 10, we have Shrink. This is a quick play spell card that can target a monster on the field and then have its original attack until the end of the turn. Shrink directly power crept Rush recklessly when it first came out, becoming the staple stat modifying battle trick of the format at the time. And battle trick, for those of you who don't know, is a term relating to cards that only really work during the battle phase. Gadgets were a popular strategy at the time, as it was pretty much the only reliable advantage engine available in Yu-Gi-Oh! Then. The only downside of the strategy was how tiny the gadgets were, with the biggest one capping out at only 1400 attack, in comparison to the 1900 beat sticks that you could be running with level 4 monsters. To counteract this, these decks ran as much 1-for-1 removal as possible, cards like Smashing Ground and Sakuretsu Armor. You'd break even in trades for monsters, and then your gadget engine would guarantee you'd win out in card advantage in the long game. Shrink was a nice side grade for these, since it being a quick play spell allowed you to use it both defensively by setting it, or offensively by attacking into something. It's pretty good at playing around other back row as well, since it can be activated during the damage step. And a lot of common back row cannot be chained in the damage step, so you'd still be able to get your effect off. Even if the gadgets were all quite weak, having the attack made it just good enough to let them clear monarchs with even the weakest of the bunch. However, this card would be much better used in strategies that came out long after. The Gladiator Beasts were a series of monsters which all triggered powerful effects at the end of the battle phase, as long as they participated in a battle. This made cards like Shrink and Waboku much more valuable than they ever would have been, since they would protect your monsters but a battle would still occur, unlike other battle phase removal like Mirror Force. By getting your Gladiator effects off while also killing a monster, a single activation of Shrink could turn the whole game around. Still, power creep would eventually lead to Shrink being replaced by Forbidden Lance in these kinds of strategies, which could fulfill more or less the same role while also offering some pretty nice utility outside of the battle phase. And at number 9, we have Blackwing, Gale the Whirlwind. This is a level 3 Darkwing Beast tuner which can special summon itself from your hand as long as you control another Blackwing monster. While face up on the field, it can, once per turn, set an opponent's monster's attack and defense to half its current value. Gale was the first Blackwing card to be put on the limited list, where it stayed for around half a decade, and for a good reason too. Getting a tuner monster out for free without your normal summon was a huge deal when Synchro Summon had just came out. This card and Blackwing Bore the Spear allowed Blackwing decks to spam level 7 Synchro monsters out to the field, which included powerful threats like Blackwing Armor Master, which can't be destroyed by battle, or Black Rose Dragon, which could just blow up the field, all while Black Whirlwind provided advantage turn after turn. Gale was so good, it saw play in a wide variety of decks that didn't have a single other main deck Blackwing monster though. It just provided so much utility by itself that even having to burn your normal summon on it was completely fine. This card's stat having effect is permanent, and stacks with itself, letting it to be used to beat over any beater below 2600 attack by just having it on the field. Gale traded incredibly well with Stardust Dragon, a really common boss monster for the time, making it a great way to unlock all your destruction effects which Stardust could negate. It also often dissuaded your opponent from dropping a Gore's Emissary Darkness during the battle phase, since you could just make it tiny during the main phase too. On top of all of that, its level for synchro plays and typing for chaos monsters made it fit like a glove in almost anything. Even if Gale isn't what people think about when they hear broken Blackwing monsters anymore, it was such a threat back in the day, it stayed limited throughout the whole synchro era. And today's video is brought to you by World Anvil. World Anvil is a browser-based world building software, which helps you with world building for either your own personal created worlds, or something like a D&D campaign, which is what I use it to keep track of all my NPCs. Recently, they just rolled out a new feature called Chronicles, which allows you to link your various world-building articles to physical places inside a map. Chronicles supports different types of maps so you can always swap between them, like if you're running some kind of parallel timeline in your universe, or you want to go back in time and set up some alternative histories. It also allows you to create your own calendar so you can change the time, day, or week to suit the needs of your world. And there's a built-in wizard to help you set it up easier. That way, it's not too confusing to jump straight into. And you can also share this with other people. So, for example, you're in a D&D campaign, you need to catch up some newer players on your world, they can interact with the map directly and just get the information for themselves. So, if that all sounds useful, just click the link in the video description for more details. And if you get an annual membership, you can use my promo code TheDuelLogs for 40% off. And at number 8, we have Drill Warrior. This is a level 6 Earth Synchro monster with 2400 attack, and it can be made with Drill Synchron and other non-tuner monsters. Its first effect lets you have its attack so that it can attack directly for the turn. Its second one lets you discard a card to banish it until your next standby phase, and when it comes back, you get to add any monster from your graveyard to your hand. Drill Warrior was the best out of all of the Synchro Synchrons for a while, providing endless card advantage and being pretty annoying to remove. With its direct attack effect, you could skirt over other powerful monsters on the board, like Colossal Fighter, or flip effects which would take it out, like Raiko the Lightsworn Hunter. By tagging itself out into your next standby phase, it'd be protected by most common forms of removal too, which were usually used to take out threats on the board. Quick Draw Synchron can be substituted for any Synchron tuner listed on a card, and was the main way this card was accessed, alongside the rest of the Synchron toolbox. Quick Draw Dandy Warrior was a really popular deck from the Synchro era, which combined Quick Draw and Dandelion to give you really easy access to Drill. Quick Draw could pitch Dandelion to special himself from the hand, and then Dandelion's effect would trigger in the graveyard to give you a couple of tokens, letting you go into your extra deck without even using your normal summon. By this point, if your Drill Warrior's stuck, you could continuously get back Dandy from the graveyard and then discard it again with its tag out effect for a constant stream of tokens turn after turn, which are both Synchron fodder and blockers for your opponent's attacks. Unfortunately, this strategy fell off as the game sped up more and more, and while at least Quick Draw managed to see play again years later to make auto-matic to Zulkin, Drill Warrior remained as just a relic of its time. And at number 7, we have Ghostrick Dullahan. This is a rank 1 Dark Fiend monster with 1000 attack and can be made with any 2 level 1 monsters. It gains 200 attack for each Ghostrick card you control, including itself, and once per turn during either player's turn, you can detach material to halve the attack of a monster on the field. Also, if it's sent to the graveyard, you can add back another Ghostrick card from your graveyard to your hand. Now, the Ghostricks were never really a viable deck due to how slow they were, even for the time when they were released, but many other Xyz monsters went on to become decent extra deck staples. Outside of Dullahan, both Ghostrick So Cute Boss and Ghostrick Alucard saw play in rank 2 and 3 strategies respectively. Dullahan had something else going for it in that it was pretty much the best generic rank 1 monster for a really long time. So it's not like decks with lots of level 1s had much better to play. This card also formed a really annoying loop with Ghostrick Jack Frost, one of the only main deck Ghostricks that saw play due to being a battle hand trap which could special summon itself and flip a monster face down when it declared an attack. If you had a way to get another level 1 on the field after using Jack Frost against your opponent, you could overlay the two of them into Dullahan, which once removed would return Jack back to your hand again. The rank 1 pool was so unremarkable for such a long time that this card was even a staple in Spiral decks. Spiral Quick Fix is a level 1 monster which can come back from the graveyard on a non-once per turn effect, but it banishes itself when it leaves the field when summoned this way. The best way to loop this effect is to overlay Quick Fix and another level 1 into an Xyz monster, since it won't count as leaving the field. After using this effect, Dullahan could then become a 2k beater by going into Ghostrick Angel of Mischief, which could help you get to lethal. And coming in at number 6, we have Black Garden, a field spell which, whenever a monster is normal or special summoned, it cuts their attack in half and then gives a plant type 800 attack and defense token to your opponent, the player who summoned it. It can also destroy itself and all plant monsters on the field to special summon a monster from your graveyard, as long as its attack matches the combined attack of all monsters that were destroyed this way. So if you destroyed 2 Black Garden tokens, you'd be able to summon out a 1600 attack monster from your graveyard, for example. When Black Garden first came out, it was a decent card in slower stun strategies. The attack loss and token spam would grind the game to a halt if the card stuck around, specifically if you had another monster up before activating Black Garden. Also, since Link Summoning wasn't a thing yet, you could eventually manage to clog up your opponent's whole board with tokens, locking them out of summoning anything useful unless they drew it out. This card was really good in Chain Beat, a strategy focused on sticky, hard to get rid of monsters such as Evil Swarm Thunderbird and Wind Up Rabbit to slowly dwindle your opponent's resources. Black Guardian combos extremely well with these two monsters because they can banish themselves and come back later, and when they do, they aren't special summoned back to your field, they just simply return. This means they won't trigger Black Guardian again, and will forget about the first stat loss that they were summoned while this card was on the field. It fell off a bit as the meta progressed and Chain Beat became just a nuisance and not a legitimate strategy. But it came back again in the meta at an unexpected time as a side deck staple during some Master Rule 4 formats. Sky Striker was a dominant deck in the meta, having their best spell, Engage, completely unrestricted in the ban list. This deck also happened to go extremely well with Mystic Mine, a recent release at the time, which was even easier to search as Terraforming was at 2 back then. Black Guardian countered Sky Striker Mine decks better than anything else, since giving your opponent's tokens let them both disable Mystic Mine's lock and Sky Striker Engine by flooding your opponent's main deck board with monsters. And coming in at number 5, we have Parallel Exceed. This is a level 8 Wind Cyberus monster, which can special summon itself to a zone a Link monster points to when you Link Summon. Then, when it's summoned, you can special summon another copy of itself from your deck to your field. Also, whenever this card is special summoned by either of its effects, its level and stats become half the original amounts. Parallel Exceed is an amazing extender for almost every deck which can put out a Link monster arrow reliably. Pretty much every deck with an archetypal Link 1 will at least consider running this card. The first deck this became really good in was Prank Kids, while Prank Kids Meow Meow Mew was legal. Exceed would let you pull double duty, not only giving you a couple level 4 bodies in the field, but also chain blocking your Prank Kid graveyard effects. You could leverage the 2 bodies into either an Abyss Dweller to instantly win the mirror match, or Trap Tricks of Flesia, which was the deck's only way to play around Nibiru as long as you had Gravedigger's Trap Hole in your deck. This engine stopped seeing play after the adventure cards were released though, since they filled the role of extenders which shielded you versus hand traps much better. Nowadays, this card is very popular in Math Mech decks, because of how well they can make use of Cyber's bodies while also having an easy Link 1 to access Link Disciple. In that deck, you can use Parallel Exceed to go into the archetypal rank 4, which can add one of the strongest cybers in the game, Mathmech Circular, from your deck to your hand. You can also use them to go into all kinds of cybers plays, such as IP Masquerena for disruption, or Decode Talker Heat Soul for +1 every turn while it stays on the field. And at number 4, we have True Draco Apocalypse, a continuous trap which can either pop another True Draco or True King card you control to have the attack and defense of all your opponent's monsters permanently, or let you tribute summon one of these monsters out of your hand during your opponent's main phase. Additionally, if this card in the field is sent to the graveyard, you can target and destroy another monster on the field. The True Draco archetype was a force in the Yu-Gi-Oh meta for ages, taking multiple years of ban lists for it finally to be whittled down. At release, they were so powerful that only they could compete with Zodiac's WoW, another archetype which is almost synonymous for Tier 0 in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. All the True Draco monsters can be summoned by tributing their continuous spell traps in the field, all of which have effects when they leave the field to either pop spell traps or monsters. The main monsters all plus you when your opponent activates any card or effect, by searching cards or just activating them straight from the deck. For a while, they even had access to one of the most terrifying towers in Yu-Gi-Oh! Masterpiece the True Draco Slaying King, which backs them up by being unaffected by most card effects with a quick effect in order to destroy cards in the field. True Draco Apocalypse gave the deck amazing utility as one of the best ways to pop your own back row to use as disruption during your opponent's turn, while also making the battle phase much worse for your opponent. Since True Draco King's first effect modifies attack and defense, it can be activated even during the damage step, where it's really hard to answer. This also gave this card some added utility later, because you can pop your monsters during the damage step when an Xyz battles it, which ends the battle without a replay. The Xyz doesn't count as having participated in a battle when this happened, which makes your opponent unable to drop a Zeus on you afterwards. In Dynamite Knight, the True Draco fighter was limited for a long time due to being the one who could search the trap straight from the field to the deck, and only recently has been getting off the ban list as True Draco has fallen off in the meta. And at number 3, we have Lost Wind. This is the normal trap which can target a face-up special zone monster on the field and then negate its effects and have its original attack. It also has a graveyard effect, where if your opponent special summons a monster from the extra deck while it's there, it can set itself, but then it gets banished when it leaves the field. Lost Wind began to see play as soon as it came out due to how much value it gave you out of a single card. Being able to permanently negate and have a monster's attack was already pretty good, but getting to reuse it again later on in the duel would give you much more mileage out of this card than almost any other trap in the game. This was kind of a power cut version of Breakthrough Skill. Another trap with a similar effect, but would only negate the monster's effect until the end of the turn, even if it doesn't need your opponent to do any extra deck summoning in order to get its effect off. Lost Winds benefited massively from that Grass Looks Greener, which came out in the same set as itself, by far the strongest mill spell ever printed in Yu-Gi-Oh! All kinds of grass decks would play it as something that's great to both draw and mill, often even alongside the previously mentioned Breakthrough Skill. However, this card was at its scariest when played together with the Paleozoic cards in 60-card Paleofrog decks. After milling a ton off of grass, this card in your hand would also give you 2 Paleozoic bodies in the field through their graveyard effects, which you could use for one of the strongest Xyz monsters ever put into the game. Totally awesome. Nowadays, with the banning of grass and how fast the game has become, you probably won't see many normal traps being played unless they instantly win you the game or are easily accessible. So Lost Winds, despite still being technically very good, isn't part of the metagame anymore. And at number 2, we have Floowandereeze Empen. This is a wind wing beast monster with 2700 attack and 1000 defense. Its effects are that when it's tribute summoned, you can add a Floowandereeze spell trap from your deck to your hand, and then lets you normal summon one monster after the effect resolves. While it's on the field, it prevents your opponent's special summon monsters from activating their effects if they're in attack position, and if it battles, you can banish a card from your hand during the damage calculation to have that monster's attack and defense until the end of the turn. By itself, this card's Floodgate effect is already pretty strong, especially if your opponent is playing a link-heavy strategy because they don't even have the option to play around it by summoning monsters in defense position. Still, Empen's passive effect is seen as more of a bonus than anything else because the deck makes use of the much more obnoxious floodgates like Barrier Statue of the Stormwinds and Dimension Shifter. Its on-summon effect is usually used to search the archetypal trap, which lets Floowandereeze players play out their turn again during their opponent's main phase, but this time ending on a Rise of the Mega Monarch or Mist Valley Apex Avian on top of Empen for extra disruption. On top of that, it can beat over most threats by battle with its stat-having effect, whose cost doesn't really matter because all the small birds in the deck can return to your hand after they've been banished anyways. All of this makes Floowandereeze an extremely annoying strategy to play against, where Empen acts as a floodgate, extender, and board breaker all at once. It doesn't dominate the meta because the deck is actually pretty bricky, but sometimes they will open hands with Robina, Map, and Dimensional Shifter, and the match will feel completely unwinnable from the get-go. And finally, at number 1, we have Forbidden Droplet. This is a quick play spell card which sends any number of other cards from your hand or field to the graveyard as cost, and then you get to negate and have the attack of monsters equal to the number of cards you sent this way. Additionally, your opponent cannot respond using the same cards as the types you pitch for its cost. So, for example, if you send a monster and a spell, your opponent can only respond to it with trap cards. Droplet is one of the strongest staples currently in the game. It performs incredibly well when going both first and second due to being a quick play spell, and in many formats it was the best out to any absurd boss monsters with negates your opponent might have. By just sending at least a single monster, you'd render cards like Baron de Fleur and Borreload Savage Dragon useless, while also making them easier to beat up by battle. This card is often compared to Dark Ruler No More, a card with a similar effect that can be activated for free, but there's a reason why in most formats Dark Ruler No More was a side deck card while Droplet was a main deck one. The cost can be alleviated by just chaining it to other spells which are already resolving on the field, which essentially gives you one more free negate. On many decks, just being able to send a monster to the graveyard is value enough, since they can get their graveyard effects off while also disabling your opponent's threats. You can also use Droplet to dodge on-field negates, such as Effect Failure, Infinite Impermanence, because you can send your monster to the graveyard as cost and have it resolve in the graveyard. And lastly, Droplet does not prevent damage to your opponent, which is very important in decks that can OTK easily with something like an Access Code Talker. If your deck can't play many defensive hand traps for whatever reason, there are few better staples you can run than Forbidden Droplet. Its utility by itself is unrivaled by most other going second staples, except maybe Super Polymeration with the release of Garura Wings of Resonant Life, but it also doesn't take up extra deck space. Even if it has lost some popularity in the current Sprite and Tier Limits meta, it was in most decks pretty much since it was released, and it's only a matter of time before that's the case again. This is one of the best generic cards in the game, and the best card which have stats in Yu-Gi-Oh! By far. Alright, and that's the list. If you happen to know of any other cards we may have missed, or have ideas for future videos just like this one, please let us know down in the comments below.